It's John here in York. I'm not in York, I'm in Malton. So let me know when you can, of course, you can see and, of course, indeed hear me. Always just like to do a bit of an audio and visual check early on. So we've had some. Hello, Elizabeth. Lovely to see you. Good morning. Almost noon. Oh, Janie's with us. Hello, Janie. How nice. Now, have you been to Malton, Janie? Janie's a relatively new resident of these parts. Been here, what, 3-4 years now? I would think. Hello, Mitzi. Tell me, Janie, have you made it across to Malton yet? Very short hop on the coastliner bus. Fun fact. Hello, Trish. Always good to see you. And Ronnie. Happy anniversary, Trish. Oh, very congratulations. And if it's a big one, but there I am. Here I am. Just here. Always here to be found. 5 o'clock on Saturdays. Well, 5 o'clock where I am. Not what time it is where you are. But for Janie, it's 5 o'clock. But for others, it's a wee bit earlier in the day. So I hope this is a nice start to the day. If you're still at breakfast or if it's lunchtime, you've had a nice, pleasant, stress-free morning. And you can put your feet up for an hour and gather around the digital hearth for some storytelling. So this was all good. Been here since August 22nd. Yep, not waiting to Malton yet. Well, okay, well, there's time yet, huh? Hello, Marlene. 1 p.m. in Nova Scotia. Well, what's the weather doing over where you are? Hope it's pleasant. It's kind of cool-ish here today. But it's nice touring weather. Not too hot and not too much bright sunshine to kind of get in the way. Hello, Susan. Because that can be a frustration when you're obviously trying to point the camera towards things. And yeah, nothing but a blue. It's semi-sunny. Yeah, we're about the same. So we may get a little bit of rain. I've got an umbrella with me, but hopefully that will hold off for the tour and we'll be good to go. But we'll find out. But look forward to today. Hello from Emily and Carol. Lovely to have you back with us. So today we're in Malton and we've got some nice stories to tell you. Horses are a theme, equestrian horsey folk on today, but they're definitely a theme that's going to run through. But I'll tell you no more. Hello, Tish. But so look out for that little motif, as you might say, as we progress the tour. So I think we're about on time, nearly 5 o'clock. So we will strap in and get ready to start. I'll get myself a sip of water, and we will then commence, as they say, in France. Just booking in July. I'm going to do France and Germany, so if I can do a tour from one or both of those. Grooming is therapeutic, says Marley. Well, let's hope that this tour is equally therapeutic. So we are on 5 o'clock, so we'll put that water away, and I think we'll begin. So you're joining us here today in, let's spin that round, in Orchard Fields in Malton. And this park we're going to walk through is kind of crisscrossed with bridleways. A reminder that this is still a landscape that's shaped by horses to this day. And that's fitting because this park has been linked to horses for nearly 2,000 years. Now, back in Roman times, this hillside in front of you was used as a cavalry training guard by units of Gaulish and Byzantine horsemen. So these warriors had initially fought against the Romans. But after defeat in battle, they were then drafted into the Roman armies. What they often did, they kind of kept the best of the warriors, turned them into Romans. So these soldiers had grown up with horses, trained with them, lived with them, and now they provided a devastating weapon for Rome. And it was here, in the camp of Deventio, that the wonderfully named Alla Gallorum Picentiana, which means the Byzantine wing of the Gauls, so French obviously, rehearsed and perfected the cavalry attacks that would prove so destructive in the battlefield. Hello, KCM from Nashville. So just give you a little image, obviously not got many photos from the Roman period, but this is the kind of thing that we'd be looking at here. So I'll just give you a moment to kind of take on board. You can imagine a unit of these coming towards you would be enough to put the willies up you, as you might say. We've got the second image as well, which we'll bring that on. So get rid of that one. And so these are official artist sort of portraits. They're based on archaeology. which of course is the source material for so much of what we know about the Roman Empire. And archaeologists first investigated the site where we are now in the 1930s. And the finds that they uncovered, pottery, tools, kind of fragments of buildings, get rid of that for you. Fragments of buildings became the foundation of the Malton Museum collection, which is a bit further up the road. But the most kind of striking thing is, and obviously if you look at these undulations, you get a sense of where these kind of walls of the camp were, is how much still lies beneath the surface. We're standing on layers of history. Roman barracks, workshops, granaries, and the defensive ditches that once protected the fort. So if I just kind of spin around, you will get very intimidating, Elizabeth, absolutely. You know, I think I use police horses to this day. You know, they really are a powerful force. So we're looking at the defensive structure you can see. So we know that the earliest fort here was made of timber, which would have been quick to build, a kind of functional statement of intent. After kind of arriving, you build yourself a wooden fort, you bed in, you dig your ditches, you make your defensive fortifications, and you've kind of arrived. But what we also know is that by the early 2nd century, the Romans rebuilt the walls into stone, turning this into a permanent frontier base. And again, we've got an image from up on Hadrian's Wall area that we think the gatehouse would have been resembled. Because the thing with the Romans is they use blueprints. They use the kind of same architectural designs over and over. So if you can find something that's extant, as you might say, in other words, largely complete in one area, you can usually, or hopefully, with historical records, sort of pull enough information and go, okay, we know it was that kind of site. We know it was a kind of a staging, post between two towns. It's a main location, civilian. So we pretty much are certain that this is what the fort would look like where we are now, the West Gate. So it's kind of nice to be able to do this kind of comparison, and that's really helpful for the Romans, as I say, because they're very consistent in their architectural styles. But the Romans didn't choose this spot by chance. They built the fort on the north side of the River Derwent, about 18 miles from Ebenezer, or York, as we like to call it these days, on a natural crossing point that allowed them to control movement through the Vale of Pickering and towards the coast. And it was what you might call a strategic hinge between inland Yorkshire and the North Sea. So obviously interpretation boards over here about the various digs, the finds, stuff you find in the museum. So it's well worth a visit, Janie. Come and see the museum. Corner marker here of the Roman fort. Hello, Laurie. So let me again just bring you up. I'll show you that fort in a minute, but the corner part. But have a look. There's quite a lot going on this map, but hopefully not so much that you can't get it. So have a look, kind of right in the centre, really. You've got, or sort of in the centre, but sort of lower third, you've got Ebenezer York. If you look there, below in the bottom right corner, you've got Lincoln, and this is where the forces came from originally. So they were brought up, remember our foundation story, to kind of quell civil disturbance with the Brigantes. And so they brought troops up from Lincoln, so they kind of crossed over. So on the left-hand side, you've got the road up to Scotland, to Hadrian's Wall, running through York, which is obviously Ebenezer, the major fortress. But slightly to its right there, you'll see that you've got Deventio, which is Malton, which is basically on the access route to the North Yorkshire coast. So basically it was a kind of strategic crossroads. It's a very, very kind of important location for the Romans, and that's why they were here. That's why they kind of really dug in and built themselves a fortress of stone. So they got to the corner of it. And as with so many kind of Roman military sites, a kind of civilian settlement kind of grew up around it. So traders, craftsmen, families, people who followed the army, because where the soldiers were, business followed. Soldiers had money, they would get paid, they wanted supplies, they wanted food, wine, entertainment, ladies. Let's start with one. And so all manner of kind of, everything from like a travelling circus of entertainers, of suppliers, of people giving them writing materials to kind of write home. So with the soldiers, you kind of get money, you get cash, you get an economy. So consequently, you get civilian settlements. And most of that was on the far side of the Derwent, which is down that way, from where we were kind of working away from, sort of Norton and Old Malton. And that's on the kind of the east road, connects the east to the coast and then kind of west to York. So it's a kind of good hinge. So Malton's sort of story really begins then with the kind of movement of soldiers, of goods, of ideas. And that sense has never really quite left the town. The Romans laid the foundations here, but it would be nearly 1700 years later in the Georgian area that Malton would truly come into its own. So we're leaving Orchard Fields now. We're going to walk down towards the town, and we're going to talk about the chap who founded Malton. And if you were on the Dick Turpin tour a few weeks ago, which was about Wentworth, Wentworth was the son of this chap. So there's always a nice flow between my tours. So here we go. So in 1713, Thomas Watson Wentworth, one of the richest landowners in England, was travelling through this landscape in his stately carriage. His surveyor was by his side, meticulously planning the estate that would become modern Malton. You see, he just bought it all. He got out his checkbook and he bought it all. And now he was going to rebuild this medieval settlement that traces back to the Roman settlement, the campment, to be this modern 18th century estate. So everything, including these estate cottages we're looking at here, fell under Wentworth's demanding eye. He was a leading politician and the man who built one of the largest houses in England, a place called Wentworth Woodhouse. And from his carriage he issued instructions, and everything was to be done to his specifications. But not everything here was of his making. Coming in, but now into medieval. So can you see how we've moved from this building material now to something sort of far coarser and far older? So this gatehouse that we're looking at here, I say, predates the estate, and it belonged to the old castle. And the gatehouse in front of us here was built in 1604. So maybe Wentworth liked it, maybe he liked the structure, or perhaps his origin story appeared to him. Because this gatehouse once stood beside a much larger house, prior to the one you're looking at here, that was built by Ralph Lloyd Ure. And when he died, the property passed to his daughters, Margaret and Mary. And that's when things took a wonderfully dramatic turn. The sisters fell out over ownership. The argument grew so fierce that the county sheriff had to intervene. Now his solution was he demolished the house and divided the stones into two equal piles, so each sister received her fair share. Very kind of literal, very Yorkshire way of settling dispute. And one of the sisters used the stones to build the house that you're looking at in front of you now. We'll pop that in your portfolio. It's lovely, isn't it? Isn't that wonderful? It's a very kind of, it brings to mind how it's Solomon, isn't it? You know, that he kind of threatens to cut the baby in half. That parable, if you know that one, that story. But it wasn't Wentworth's way to be sharing things like that. He didn't compromise. His was the only vision that mattered. So when he began reshaping Malton, he took what remained, including this stretch of medieval castle wall, and he folded it into his new Georgian estate. So what you see here is a blend of old and new. The fragment of a long-lost castle flowing seamlessly into the cottages that he commissioned. So if we're just going to pin back there, obviously we're sat back a little bit from the road now so you can't see him, but it looks like a continuum. It's really, really clever architecture, the way he's kind of embraced this old kind of castle exterior curtain wall and made it feel like it's just organically part of his kind of new vision. I'd imagine he'd be very pleased with that. And we can imagine him, I think, that day in 1715, a man in a carriage with a surveyor by his side, being driven down the hill towards the heart of the estate that he now means to remake. So I'm just going to try and get us across the road because the pavement disappears altogether. I'll just give you a last little glimpse of the old lodge, which is absolutely delightful. And as I say, that's what happens when you knock houses down and build two new ones with the stones that left behind. Not too shabby, I agree. There's a lot of traffic here, so I'm just going to wait for a gap. You can look at that while I just focus in on not getting run over, which is always a boon on a Saturday afternoon. And it's not the easiest, there's lots of cars, so you're going to get a slightly longer look. So yeah, so I want you to imagine now, look at this house in front of us here. I want you to imagine that we've got Thomas Watson Wentworth. He's in his carriage, we're running down the hill now into the town, and he's discussing with his surveyor every detail that he wants to kind of remake. So beneath his wheels lay the footprint of a long vanished monastery. These were monastic lands. Foundations and memory where monks once paced and prayed. Now waiting to be written over by a very different kind of authority. Because now the power had moved. Wentworth rode like a god. His carriage a chariot of design. Silken lacquer, pulled along by horses that seemed to know they were part of a procession. At his side, the surveyor unrolled maps and measured the town as if this were a theatre set. Orders were not questions, but declarations. Where others asked whether something could be done, Wentworth only asked how long he must wait, and whether, when finished, the estate would be the grandest in the county. For men like Wentworth, the ledger of cost was someone else's problem. The surveyor worried over figures and labour. Wentworth worried over scale and reputation. He thought in vistas and facades, in the way a row of houses would read from the carriage window. In the impression of a single gatehouse, he could make framed a new avenue. So he's thinking about sightlines, thinking about vistas. He's thinking about the way that we approach. We didn't so much remodel as compose. A medieval wall becomes a stage piece. A crooked plot was straightened into a line that led the eye to an imagined horizon. The past was not erased, it was folded, gilded, and set to serve a new story. And such was his confidence that he could almost see ahead, 50 years forward from that day in 1713, into the 1760s, the 1770s, when Malton would begin to answer his composition with his own life. The avenues that he laid out would become approaches of visitors. The gatehouse a marker for those seeking lodgings. Cottages adapted into shops and rooms to let. Fields measured for service would become measured instead in stables and yards. The river and the road read as routes of commerce as much as boundaries of an estate. So what began as an exercise in private grandeur would, by degrees, make possible a town of hospitality, inns and coaching houses clustered where travellers needed them, markets serving both tenant and stranger, craftsmen and hostlers turning the passage of people into steady work. So as the carriage rolled on, the single commanding voice that ordered stone and sight softened into the everyday chorus of movement. Harnesses creaking, wheels on cobbles, doors opening to strangers. Wentworth's design remained written into the stones, but the road itself filled with many hands and many journeys, and the place that he composed for himself began, quietly and inexorably, to become a destination. Hi, Patty. Nice to have you aboard. Now, by the 1770s, Malton was no longer just the estate Wentworth had composed. It had become a well-established stopping point for stagecoaches on the busy route between York and the coast. Travellers knew this stretch of road, and they knew what it promised. Coaching inns lined the way, offering food, drink, warmth, and a chance to change horses after being after hours of being jolted over rutted and dusty tracks. For anyone arriving from the moors or long pull out of York, the sight of the Rose and Crown pub, which is coming up to you now, would have been a godsend. Lanterns glowing, doors open, the smell of ale and hot food drifting into the street. Inns like this were the heartbeat of the road. The Rose and Crown was once one of the great coaching inns of this route, a place of warmth, food and rest long before the railways arrived. In the days when travel meant hours of jolting over rough, rutted roads, the sight of a coaching inn like this must have been a welcome relief. Inside, travellers found a hot meal, a fire, a tankard of ale, a clean bed. Outside, the horses were just well cared for. Fresh teams kept ready in the stables so the coach could change horses and continue on its journey. But the stagecoaches carried more than just passengers. They carried the mail, letters, parcels, money orders, legal papers. The Royal Mail coaches were painted bright red and travelled to strict timetables, changing horses at inns like the Rose and Crown. Now, the post office, which is kind of coming into view in a second, you should be able to see the red telephone boxes either side of it, is a kind of fine example of civic architecture, solid, kind of confident, built to last. And the mail was unloaded here the moment the coach arrived. Passengers no doubt relieved that the journey had passed without incident, because with the mail came value, and with value came risk. Highwaymen watched these routes carefully, knowing that a single coach might hold more wealth in its strongbox than a village saw in a month. A well-timed ambush on a dark stretch of road could make a fortune. Now, the drivers were skilled, the guards were armed, and the mailbox were locked. But even so, the risks were very real. A coach thundering along the York to Scarborough Road would have been a dramatic sight. A team of horses at full stretch. A guard perched high at the back with his blunderbuss. So guards rode armed and alert. But the best defence was always speed. Good horses, well shod, well fed, kept in perfect running order. And of course, all this depended on one thing above all else: horses. Strong, reliable, well-trained horses capable of pulling heavy coaches over long distances. In all weathers, on roads that were often little more than rutted tracks. And with such challenging conditions, high-quality equestrian equipment wasn't just useful, it was essential. Harnesses, saddles, reins, bits, blankets, grooming tools, everything had to be durable, dependable, and ready for the demands of the road. A broken strap or a worn buckle could mean delays, danger, or worse. And that brings us to Parnaby's in front of us. Parnaby's has been part of Malton for over 300 years, an equestrian and country store that has served generations of riders, farmers, travellers, and horsemen. In the coaching era, places like this were vital. They supplied the gear that kept the mail coaches running, the horses comfortable, and the travellers safe. They were part of the unseen machinery that made long-distance travel possible. But there came a moment when all of this stood on the edge of change. By the spring of 1853, the railway was pushed across Yorkshire with unstoppable confidence. In just a few weeks, June of that year, the new line would reach Malton, linking York, the coast, and everywhere in between. And when it did, the great stagecoaches would vanish almost overnight. Inns would fall silent. Ostlers would lose their trade. and places like Parnaby's would wonder what the future held. And so in April of that year 1853, 3 gentlemen came into Malton by coach, perhaps arriving that way for the last time. As the horses slowed and the carriage rocked to a halt, one of them noticed a slim volume left on the seat beside him. A new kind of guidebook, a symbol of the age that was coming. A Bradshaw's. He picked it up, flicked through its pages, and with that, the future was in his hands. As the 3 gentlemen stepped down from the coach, brushing the dust of the road from their coats, one of them stretched luxuriously and declared, "I say, it must be time for luncheon. Roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, what?" And the others nodded approvingly. As they set off from Parnaby's, the one holding the guidebook opens it with great ceremony. "Listen to this," he announces, clearing his throat. "Malton, a town of considerable antiquity, pleasantly situated upon the Derwent and much frequented by travellers." His friend groans. "Oh, do put that away. Why have you brought a railway guide? We've come by coach. What use is that thing to us?" At this, the reader bristles. Bradshaw's is not merely railways. It contains all manner of useful information. Useful? We're looking for luncheon, not a timetable. So they continue as we are down Finkel Street. The guidebooks are open, the arguments simmering, and then the first man stops abruptly, tapping the page. "Here, look at this." And he reads aloud. "Yorkshire pudding, a local speciality of some antiquity, first recorded as a dripping pudding in the last century. Yorkshire pudding began as a thrifty idea, a batter placed beneath roasting meat so the hot fat and juices would drip down into it, creating something light, crisp and delicious. The first version appeared in 1737 in The Whole Duty of a Woman, where it was simply called a dripping pudding. But it was Hannah Glasse, one of the influential food writers of the 18th century, who gave it the name that we know today. In her book, The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, she wrote, "It is an exceedingly good pudding. The gravy of the meat eats well with it." Her recipe spread across the country and Yorkshire pudding became a national favourite. So the men stroll on, the guidebook fluttering in the breeze. And so he reads once more. "The town is noted for its long association with good food and honest fare, much of it supplied to nearby York." And the men approve of this wholeheartedly. And the marketplace opens before them, broad, handsome, framed by Georgian confidence. And one of the men gestures towards a stone building at its centre. "What's this then? Looks official." And he reads out, "The market hall, erected 1749 for the trade in butter and dairy produce, a place of considerable local importance." The Market Hall of Malton, erected in 1749 at the direction of the Marquis of Rockingham, is a structure of some dignity and local consequence. Designed for the sale of butter and other dairy produce brought in from the surrounding countryside, it stands prominently in the centre of the marketplace, its neat classical proportions lending an air of civic pride to the town. Within its walls, the weekly trade is conducted with a briskness characteristic of the district, the farmers and the dealers assembling from an early hour. The building has in more recent years been employed for the holding of petty sessions and other minor courts, and continues to serve as a convenient and well-situated venue of business in the town. Travellers will find it a notable landmark and a pleasing example of mid-18th century municipal architecture. And the men look around, suitably impressed. Remarkable what one can learn from a railway guide. One of the men flicks through the guide again. Heading on down, he says here, this part of town is noted for its chapels and its respectable houses. Quite right too. Very decorous. And he reads out, Savile Street, ascending gently from the marketplace, is one of the more respectable thoroughfares of Malton, distinguished by a pleasing succession of Georgian houses, whose uniformity of design imparts an air of quiet dignity to the neighbourhood. The street is noted for its chapels and institutions of a religious character, amongst which is the former Methodist chapel, a modest yet decorous edifice of early 19th century is particularly worthy of remark. Thank you, Elizabeth. The visitor will find Savile Street less bustling than the commercial quarters below, its calm aspect reflecting the sober habits of inhabitants who have long favoured this part of the town. Its elevation affords agreeable views towards the surrounding countryside, and the whole forms a tranquil and well-ordered district, indicative of Malton's steady growth during the last century. The men fall briefly silent, taking in a shift from bustle to calm. At the top of the street, one of them closes the guide with a snap. Well then, we've seen the market, we've seen the chapel, now let's find this George Hotel. I want to hear about Dickens and the local characters. Speaking of local characters, said the other, who are we to ask about Dickens? And the reply came, the landlord of the George Hotel. They say he's a 6'6" man, a giant of a man. Just get a sip of water. The three Victorian gents turn into Yorkers Gate, and there it is, the George Hotel. Unmistakable, solid, handsome, standing exactly where it's always stood. They begin to cross the road towards it, when Bradshaw, reader, slows, lifts his book slightly and says, "Is this it then? Is this the place Dickens wrote about?" And a deep, warm laugh rolls out behind them. They turn and find themselves staring at a waistcoat the size of a mainsail. This, no sir, this is the Corn Exchange. Not been built more than 7 years, at least it's empty. Meant to be for the farmers, you see, to trade the corn. But they don't want it, they've got their own ways. Strange folk. The landlord smiles. That knowing smile that suggests he's seen more of human nature than most. A great man once told me that people can be very strange indeed. The Bradshaw reader brightens. Was that? Yes, it was Mr. Charles Dickens. He gestures down the narrow lane beside the George Hotel. Follow me, gentlemen, for this is the way. And they fall in behind him. A few steps, the sound of their boots on the cobbles, and then, without turning, now then, gentlemen, this is where Malton's story meets London's greatest storyteller. This was the home of the Smithsons, a family of solicitors. Their firm stood here for generations. Whilst Charles Smithson was training in London, he met a young writer with a quick tongue and a quicker pen, Charles Dickens. They became close friends. But when Charles's father and brothers died in quick succession, duty pulled him back to Malton. Dickens visited him here often, and when Smithson died suddenly in 1844, Dickens rushed from York by post-chaise. He left at 7 in the morning. He arrived just in time for the funeral at 9:30.
Really?
Aye. A hard journey, cold, fast, and full of grief. Dickens helped the family search for a will, but none was ever found. And later, he honoured his friend the only way he knew how. He put him in a book, Mr. Spenlow in David Copperfield, that is Charles Smithson. And he told the family something else, something he never wrote down. That this is Scrooge's counting house. The office in A Christmas Carol was inspired by the one right here in this lane. And the bells that ring through this story, the ones that summon the ghosts, they were the bells of St. Leonard's. At this, the gentleman with the Bradshaw guidebook brightens and flips it open. Ah, St. Leonard's, let's see what Bradshaw has to say about that. You won't find the truth in any books, sir. Mr. Dickens never wrote it down. Instead, he told it to me. And I will share it with you. Mr. Dickens said that those bells marked the moment when time began to slip its hold, as though the bells themselves were loosening from the shackles of time, that stern and unforgiving governor. Each stroke slipping free of the hour that it belonged to. So now that Scrooge had slipped into a time of his own, no longer a time he shared with others, and his time was running out. For grief can cast men adrift, gentlemen, set him loose upon a sea where no clock strikes the hour and no friendly voice can reach him. You may stand in a room full of people and yet feel utterly alone. That was Scrooge, a man surrounded by the world yet sealed off from it. Adrift in a darkness of his own making and unable to find his way back. Mr. Dickens himself told me that he wished to place a man in darkness, not the gentle darkness of night, but a darkness of the soul. A room where candles had guttered low, where no light remained, no hope, no future. A fire that gave no warmth, no comfort, no kindly glow of embers, only the chill that had settled in the man's own heart. For Scrooge was cold long before the winter set in, cold in spirit, cold in purpose, cold to every human plea. And there it was, in that darkness, that he began to let the light back in. A glimmer at first, a trembling spark, and then a procession of spirits that would teach him what he had forgotten. That he must grieve now for the life that he's living, or no one would grieve for him when he was gone. And so the ghost came not to terrify him, but to save him. And Dickens told the Smithsons this. This little counting house in Chancery Lane was where he imagined it. The darkness, the cold, the tolling of the bells, the moment where the world begins to change. A counting house, yet also a kind of crypt. A place where he could lay to rest the grief he carried for his dear friend Charles Smithson, and from that grief shape a story of redemption. So when you read that book, you're not in London, you're here in Malton, in this very lane. The three gentlemen exhale as one. And then one steps forward and says, "Sir, thank you, truly." But then the spell breaks. The other says, "You wouldn't happen to know where a fellow might buy a pie?" And the landlord's face breaks into a grin. "Pies, is it? Aye. I'll head to the shambles." And he gestures for them to follow him. He walks with them out of Chancery Lane, out of the darkness, back into the light. He's going to take them to the corner, passing the Malton Museum, the home of the collection of Roman artefacts, the place to visit while you're here. And He says, I'll take you to the corner, but no further. I need to get back to my pub. So he tells them, enter here, gentlemen, at the corner, straight ahead, you'll not go wrong. And they thank him profusely. Something of the man's story has stayed with them. Not least, of course, knowing they've been told the story that Charles Dickens taught the man to tell, to hold memory close of his friend Charles Smithson here in Malton. So the gents continue onwards, walking up the hill, viewing the stores, looking out for signs of the shambles. And just coming into view, they see a church. St Michael's rises over the marketplace, towering above it as it has done for centuries. And from his guidebook, he reads the following. St Michael's Church, situated prominently upon the marketplace, is an ancient foundation serving the inhabitants of New Malton. The others listen politely. The words drift into the air. Respectable, descriptive, proper. But after the landlord's testimony, they feel strangely hollow. Even the Bradshaw reader falters a little as he continues. Though modest in scale, the building is of considerable interest, its fabric displaying works of several periods, with the tower and western front presenting a particularly pleasing aspect to the square. He slows. The church has long been associated with the commercial life of the town, and within may be found memorials to several notable local families. The visitor will find St Michael's a convenient point from which to survey the bustle. And at that, he closes the book slowly, with a silence. And then one of the others speaks, gently, kindly. Look here, you picked up that book and it's helped us well enough, but how about we leave it here for the next travellers? The Bradshaw reader looks at the book in his hands, the guide that has brought him this far, and then at the church before them. He nods and they place the Bradshaw carefully on a ledge by the church door, and they walk on without it. Hello, Tariq. Good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. And they turn into the shambles, the old street of the butchers, and the world narrows around them. The air is cool here, shaded by the overhanging frames and the timbered eaves. Stone slabs darkened by years of work lie beneath their feet. Hooks glint under the awnings. The smell is honest. Sawdust, cold stone, fresh meat, the everyday business of Victorian town. A butcher calls out a greeting to a passing customer. A boy hurries by with a basket of trimmings. A woman haggles cheerfully over a joint for Sunday dinner. It's busy, practical, unself-conscious, the heartbeat of Malton. And one of the gents pauses at a counter where game pies sit in neat rows. Steam curling from the vents. These will do nicely. And the butcher wraps the pies in paper with a practised hand. Breakfast, is it? A small smile passes between the three men. Earlier than that, my good man, but they offer no explanation. And pies in hand, they step out of the shambles and into the open light of the horse market. The sound reaches them first, the murmur of a crowd, the clatter of hooves, the sharp whistle of a handler bringing a young horse to attention. They round the corner and into the horse fair. A yearling sale is in full swing. A bright-eyed youngster trotting out a ring of onlookers, the auctioneer's voice rising and falling like a tide. The three men stop as one. Their posture changes. Their eyes sharpen. Their voices drop into the easy confidence of men who know horses. Good rein on him, plenty of back end. He'll come on with work. The youngster turns again, showing his shoulder. He's thriving. Aye, but not all of them are. A small, knowing look passes between them. The kind men share when they see something they understand down to the bone. They watch a moment longer and then turn away, pies wrapped under their arms, and they walk on. Horses have been running on these ridges since before the Romans. The priests had their chariots up here, 2 horse teams, light as anything, racing across the hills. And the others nod. This is familiar ground. And it's still the same. You want the truth about a horse? You don't read it, you hear it. From the lads who've been up since 3, from the jockey who's felt the stride, from the man who's mucked out the box and knows if one is off his feed. He taps the wrapped pies tightly. We'll hear it tonight. We're heading now to the Talbot. The Talbot is the place for it. Owners, trainers, half the counties talk. Rockingham round the country from these rooms. Fitzwilliam nearly emptied the town with his notices. But the horses were always the real business. They walk a few more steps in companionable silence. So we're all agreed then. Aye, I've spoken to the ostler. Horses are ready. Gallops at sunrise with our breakfast. A shared look of quiet satisfaction, of purpose, of certainty. And ahead of them, the great stone facade of the Talbot begins to rise into view. Elegant, assured, built to welcome the well-to-do racing folk who come here for exactly the same reason as our 3 gentlemen. Just pause a minute while I just get a drink. So with these continuous narratives, your throat just get very dry because of continuous talking. But it's quite fun to do once in a while. So do you hope you're enjoying the storytelling wrapped up in an immersive story of old Malton. And of course, its reliance on all things horses and equestrian, which is still known to this day. It's a place of racing, trainers, stabling, equestrian suppliers, and so on and so forth. So we come round to the Talbot Hotel in just one moment, which was built as the pièce de résistance by Wentworth's son in the middle of the 18th century to be the place of social life for the county set, for the gentry that would come here for the racing. So as you come around the corner, what's that? That's it. So here we are then. The Talbot. Elegant, assured, built to welcome the well-to-do racing folk who come here year after year. And this is where our 3 gentlemen are staying, as all racing folk would. And so, like you, they're now walking towards it. And they decide not to go in, not just yet. They want to take in the grounds. They want to take in the view. So they walk straight past the entrance and out onto the terrace. And they see how the land opens up in front of them. A long, generous view stretches towards the southwest. An old road winding through fields and hedgerows, rising and falling with the shape of the land. Far off, almost imagined, lies York. The three men stand quietly, taking it in. Well then, shall we come by rail next year? It would save an awful lot of time. One of the others shakes his head. No, not for this road. This road is made for horses. And he gestures towards the winding line of the highway. You feel every turn in the wheels, every rise under the horses, every stone in the track. It's the way it's always been, the way it should be. A carriage rolls out from Malton at first light. The horses fresh, leaning into their traces. The wheels taking the first bend, the first incline, the first stretch of open road. The three men inside swaying with the movement, feeling the rhythm of the journey in their bones. The road dips, the road rises, the hedgerows slip past. The countryside opens and closes around them like a great breathing thing. The long roll of the wheels, the steady pull of the horses, the gentle lift and fall of the road beneath them. The world seeming to lean forward with them as they gather pace. Down the slope, round the bend, up the rise, over the crest. The coach keeps going, the horses keep going, the three men keep going, until they slip together over the far horizon and towards York. Inside the carriage, one says, funny, we were only really ever passing through. A small nod from the others. Not melancholy, not regret, just the simple truth. Aye, but you leave something. Everyone does. He glances back towards the town. The church spire, the horse fair, the streets where they walked. A word, a story, a book on a ledge. Enough to show that you were here. And they fall quiet again. It's the kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full. Full of the road behind them, full of the road ahead. Full of the knowledge that life is nothing more and nothing less than passing through. Passing through, leaving something behind and carrying something with them. I do hope you've enjoyed that. That was the tour that I wrote especially for you today for Life at 5. Continuous narrative. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got the idea, obviously, of the continuous narrative of the horses, starting with the Roman cavalry and the horses that carry the men off to the race at the end. And of course, the world has changed. We now see horses really associated with leisure rather than industry and transport. But for places like Malton, horses and equestrian, they're kind of buried deep into the kind of DNA of place. So to try and tell the story of Malton without horses, I think would have been remiss. So I decided to, hello, Polly, no, you're on. I decided to make that the sort of focal point of that. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time with you today. So I do hope you enjoyed that too. Thank you. I'm glad, standing ovation from KTM. Thank you very much. And as ever, thank you for your kind support. Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Susan. I mean, do watch it again. I mean, I kind of do some of these now. I'm not doing like this every week, but I'm just kind of experimenting with obviously, I was scripted the entire way through. You know, I'm now writing these, you know, as full pieces for performance, as opposed to walking on telling you about stuff. So I'm not doing that all the time, but for these ones, the Dick Turpin is another one. They are worth, I think, kind of watching them again if you're going to miss stuff. You know, because I'm obviously leaving it up there for you. So do go in and have a look, and hopefully you will kind of find depths that you might have missed when you listened to it the first time, with the chat going on and this, that, and the other. But I do hope it resonated with you. Looking forward to so am I. Thank you everybody who left a contribution. It is always so much welcomed. And now I'm taking this back seriously again. I didn't really kind of tour much for a kind of year or so, and I tried to get together virtually going, and that, less said about that the better. But anyway, I'm focusing on kind of my stuff a bit more now, and trying to rebuild. And the key thing is live. Obviously I appreciate it's convenient if you're watching this on recording, that's great. But really, I think the whole thing, when I kind of read recently a few comments about people saying, "Oh, I miss Hago," I completely get it. I understand the reasons why. It's because it was community, it was live, it was about kind of coming together. And I think because it's got so fragmented, and don't get me started on 3 calendars and all that, but the reality is that when it was appointment to view, if we missed it, it didn't matter because the tour will be repeated in a few weeks' time. That was probably a more healthy ecology for us. So I'm really focusing in on live, trying to encourage as many people to come and view live as we go down. Yeah, of course, you need to watch it afterwards, then do so. But live's where it's at. Live is the experience that is on offer, and live is community. Live is our digital hearth coming together. So hopefully by me giving you this slot, that you can kind of go, right, I know that's happening, might miss it this week, but it doesn't matter, I'll pick it up next week or whatever. You can catch you up, but try and be here, because live is where it's at. That's where it's always been about, this community, is us all experiencing the same stuff together at the same time, not watching it by yourself, weeks later. Community is what matters, connection is what matters, people is what matters, and that's what we get when we do it live. So thank you so much everybody that's joined me. I'm just a bit ahead of time this week, which is unusual for me. But thank you so much. If there's any questions, by the way, that I missed, do let me know, because obviously I was kind of very much deep into storytelling mode there. So if there are any questions, I've got a couple of minutes. I'll very, very happily kind of pull back and talk about Malton, because I appreciate there may be some fixed point of kind of fantasy. Well, that's what we hope, that, because there aren't so many now, is it? It's not like Hago where there was dozens and dozens and dozens of tours every week. So I think, if we are able to say, well, I'll make that anchor point, and if it's over your breakfast with a cup of coffee, or it's over lunch, or it's before tea, hopefully that kind of works for you. But as I say, live is what we're about, live's where we come from. And is the railway still there? Great question, Trish. Yes, the railway is still here, but not very well served, as with all things. The cuts to the branch line set up in the 1960s did kind of hammer it. So yeah, it's still here because it's on the Scarborough line. So consequently between York and Scarborough. But again, the service between York and Scarborough isn't as good as it would be. Got a Lindersell favourite one of ex-Hago. Oh, there you go. So, well, maybe that, Hago's maybe ex-us, I don't know. Hago was great. The way they left I didn't really like, but it was great. It brought us together, and that's what we need to focus on, is keeping together, communing, keeping each other well, keeping ensuring, do you know what I mean, that we're staying in touch through Facebook. But this is our digital hearth. This is where we come together round the fire, we listen to stories, and it resonates. Okay, my job is to try and make the past not something distant, but something relatable, something that is part and speaks to you of your daily life and the human condition. So that's me doing my job, but it's not so much fun doing it to relatively small live audiences. I want to do it to as many people as possible, like being in a theatre, So let's try and get everybody back to doing live, and we can rebuild that way. Not with fancy websites or calendars or any of that stuff, but just by all being in the same place at the same time. That will go a long, long way towards it. So anyway, enough of my sermonising. Thank you everybody for joining me as ever. KCM in Nashville, from Marlena in Nova Scotia, from Tish and Trish and Polly, from Ronnie Lynn, from Linda, from Janie, just a few miles down the road in York. Thank you one and all. Safe out. Laurie is with us as well today, of course, and Susan, Patty, of course, who we met in York not so many weeks ago. And there we go. So that's your lot for today. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all this time next week. So until then, bye-bye.